My daughter tried to relegate me to her basement, so I made a purchase that left her speechless and turned my retirement upside down. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was enjoying my coffee and reading the newspaper in the sunbeam streaming through my kitchen window. Retirement had been treating me well for the past 6 months, and I'd finally settled into a peaceful routine after 35 years of running my construction company. The caller ID showed Sarah's name, my daughter, and I smiled as I answered, expecting our usual pleasant chat about her kids or maybe plans for Sunday dinner. "Dad, we need to talk." Her voice carried that sharp edge I remembered from her teenage years, the tone that meant she'd already made up her mind about something and wasn't interested in discussion. I set down my coffee cup, the ceramic making a soft clink against the saucer. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "It's about your living situation." She paused, and I could hear her taking a breath like she was preparing for battle. "Michael and I have been discussing it, and we think it's time you moved in with us." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I hadn't seen coming. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Move in with you? Sarah, I'm perfectly fine in my own home." Dad, you're 72 years old. Living alone isn't safe anymore. What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency? We worry about you constantly." I looked around my kitchen, at the granite countertops I'd installed myself, the custom cabinets I'd built with my own hands, the view of the garden where my late wife Margaret had planted roses that still bloomed every spring. This wasn't just a house. This was 30 years of memories, of love, of life lived fully. "Sarah, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready for that kind of arrangement. I'm healthy, I'm active, and I'm happy here." Well, that's just not realistic anymore. Her voice turned businesslike, the same tone she used when negotiating contracts at her law firm. "We've already cleared out the basement. It's got its own entrance, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom. You'll have privacy, but we'll be right upstairs if you need anything." The basement. She wanted me to live in her basement like some kind of elderly boarder. The woman I'd raised, whose college tuition I'd paid, whose wedding I'd funded, whose mortgage I'd helped with when times were tough, wanted to stick me in a basement. "Absolutely not." The words came out firmer than I'd intended. "Sarah, I built my own home. I'm not moving into anyone's basement." "Dad, don't be stubborn about this. It's what's best for everyone. The kids would love having Grandpa so close, and Mom always said she wanted family to stick together." There it was. She was invoking Margaret's memory to manipulate me. My wife, who'd been gone for 3 years now, who'd always believed in family, but who also fiercely protected our independence and dignity. "Your mother never would have suggested I live in a basement," I said quietly. "She would have been horrified at the very idea. Times change, Dad. This is the responsible thing to do." I stood up from my kitchen table and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood I'd called home for 3 decades. Mrs. Henderson was tending her flower garden next door. The Pattersons were washing their car in their driveway. Normal people living normal lives in their own homes, with their dignity intact. "Sarah, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen carefully. I am not moving into your basement. I'm not moving anywhere. This is my home, and I'm staying here." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone cold. "Fine. But don't come crying to us when something happens and you need help. Don't expect us to drop everything and come running when you realize you can't handle living alone anymore." The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the screen until it went black, my reflection looking back at me like a stranger. In 30 seconds, my relationship with my daughter had shifted from loving concern to ultimatum to threat. I set the phone down on the counter and returned to my coffee, but it had gone cold. The newspaper lay open to the real estate section, and suddenly I found myself really looking at it for the first time. Luxury homes, estate properties, places that cost more than I'd ever imagined spending. But after 35 years of building homes for other people, after saving and investing wisely, after living modestly while others lived extravagantly, I had resources Sarah didn't know about. I thought about Margaret, about what she'd say if she were here. She'd probably laugh and tell me to do something dramatic. She'd always been the one with flair for the theatrical, the one who'd convinced me to buy her that red convertible for her 50th birthday, even though it was completely impractical. Life's too short to always be practical, Henry, she'd said. Sometimes you have to make a statement. A statement. I picked up the newspaper and really studied those real estate listings. There was one in particular that caught my eye. A mansion in Hillcrest, the most exclusive neighborhood in town. 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, swimming pool, 3-car garage, and grounds that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The kind of place Sarah and Michael had always dreamed of living in, but could never afford on their lawyer salaries. The asking price was $750,000. Steep, but not impossible. Not for someone who'd spent decades building a successful business and investing the profits wisely. I pulled out my phone and dialed the real estate agent's number before I could talk myself out of it. Hillcrest Properties, this is Amanda speaking. Hello, Amanda. I'm calling about the mansion listed on Elmwood Drive. Is it still available? Oh, yes, it's a stunning property. Are you looking to schedule a viewing? I glanced around my kitchen one more time, at the life I'd built, the home I'd created with Margaret. Then I thought about my daughter's ultimatum, about being relegated to a basement, about being treated like a burden instead of a father who'd sacrificed everything for his family. Actually, I'm interested in making an offer. Cash purchase, no contingencies, quick closing if possible. The silence on the other end lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Sir, did you say cash purchase on the Elmwood property? That's correct. When can we meet? 3 hours later, I was standing in the marble foyer of a house that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor like something from a movie. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens and a pool that sparkled in the afternoon sun. As you can see, Amanda was saying, her heels clicking on the polished floors, this is truly a one-of-a-kind property. The previous owners spared no expense. Italian marble, custom millwork, a gourmet kitchen that would make any chef weep with joy. I wasn't really listening to her sales pitch. I was thinking about Sarah's face when she discovered what her stubborn old father had done. I was thinking about the basement apartment she'd so generously offered me, and how it would compare to the master suite I was currently standing in, complete with a fireplace and a balcony overlooking the city. The seller is motivated, Amanda continued. They've already relocated for work and would prefer a quick sale. With a cash offer, we could close within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. By the time Sarah figured out what was happening, it would be too late to talk me out of it. Not that I'd give her the chance anyway. I'll take it, I said simply. Amanda stopped mid-sentence, her mouth slightly open. I'm sorry? I said I'll take it. Full asking price, cash, 2-week closing. Do we have a deal? She stared at me like I'd just told her I was from Mars. I suppose I didn't look like the typical buyer for a $750,000 mansion. 72 years old, wearing my favorite flannel shirt and work boots, probably looking more like someone who'd come to fix the plumbing than someone who could afford to buy the place outright. Sir, I have to ask, are you certain about the financing? This is a significant purchase, and I'd hate for there to be any complications during the approval process. I pulled out my phone and showed her my banking app, scrolling to the account balance that represented a lifetime of hard work and careful saving. Her eyes widened as she took in the numbers. I think we can skip the financing discussion, I said with a smile. When can we sign the papers? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of inspections, paperwork, and planning. I arranged for movers, updated my address with the post office, and transferred utilities. I bought new furniture because Margaret's cozy country style wouldn't quite work in a mansion designed for entertaining royalty. I hired a landscaping crew and a pool service because at my age, I figured I'd earned the right to have other people handle the manual labor. Through it all, I didn't say a word to Sarah. She'd called twice, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and ended demanding. I deleted them without listening to the whole messages. If she wanted to play hardball, I was happy to show her what a real power move looked like. On moving day, I stood in my old kitchen one last time, coffee cup in hand, looking out at the garden Margaret had loved so much. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was overwhelmed by something else. Excitement, anticipation, the thrill of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the old guy gets to surprise everyone. My phone buzzed with a text from the moving company. They were finished loading the truck and ready to head to the new place. I took one last look around, grabbed my keys, and walked out the front door of the house I'd called home for 30 years. As I drove through Hillcrest toward my new address, I passed joggers and dog walkers, people tending to gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most people's mortgages. These were Sarah's people, the social circle she'd always wanted to be part of, the exclusive neighborhood where she'd always dreamed of living. I pulled into the circular driveway of my new home and sat in my truck for a moment, looking up at the imposing facade. 6 bedrooms for one old man seemed excessive, but then again, I wasn't planning to be alone for long. The mansion's front door was solid mahogany, probably worth more than most people's cars. As I turned the key for the first time, I felt like I was opening a portal to a completely different life. The movers were already hard at work, carrying boxes and furniture into rooms that echoed with possibility. "Where do you want this recliner, sir?" asked one of the crew, a young man who looked like he could bench press my truck. I gestured toward what the real estate listing had called the informal living area, which was larger than Sarah's entire first floor. Right there by the windows, facing the pool. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself wandering through rooms I was still learning to navigate. The formal dining room had a table that could seat 16 people. The library had built-in shelves reaching up to a 14-foot ceiling. The master bedroom had a walk-in closet bigger than the basement apartment Sarah had so graciously offered me. By evening, the movers were gone, and I was alone in my new palace. I made myself a sandwich in the gourmet kitchen, marveling at the granite countertops that made my old ones look like particle board. Then, I walked out to the pool area and sat in one of the lounge chairs, watching the underwater lights turn the water into liquid sapphire. This was when the reality of what I'd done started to sink in. I'd just bought a mansion out of spite, a $750,000 statement that said I wasn't ready to be put out to pasture. Margaret would have either laughed until she cried or killed me herself. I wasn't sure which. My phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I decided to answer. "Dad, finally! I've been trying to reach you. Look, I'm sorry about how our last conversation ended. Michael and I have been talking, and we realized we may have been a bit pushy about the whole moving situation." I leaned back in the lounge chair, looking up at stars I'd never been able to see clearly from my old neighborhood. "Is that so?" Yes, and we want to make it right. Why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We can discuss this like adults. Maybe we can find a compromise that works for everyone." A compromise. After she demanded I live in her basement, now she wanted to negotiate. I smiled in the darkness, imagining her reaction to what I was about to tell her. "Actually, Sarah, I've already found a living situation that works perfectly for me." "Oh," her voice carried relief. "Did you find a nice senior community? I know there are some lovely places with assisted living options that might be perfect for someone your age." Someone my age. As if being 72 meant I was ready for bingo nights and early bird specials. "Not exactly," I said, standing up and walking to the edge of the pool. The water was warm against my fingers as I dipped them in. "I bought a house." "You bought a house? Dad, that seems like a big decision to make without discussing it with family. What kind of place did you find?" I looked back at the mansion, all 6,000 square feet of it glowing with warm light from the windows. "Oh, just a little place in Hillcrest." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. "Hillcrest? Dad, that's the most expensive neighborhood in the city. What exactly do you mean by a little place?" Well, it's got 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a swimming pool, and grounds that the landscaper tells me require weekly maintenance. I suppose little might not be the right word." Another silence, this one even longer. I could practically hear the gears turning in Sarah's head as she tried to process what I was telling her. "Dad, houses in Hillcrest cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. How could you possibly afford something like that?" How could I afford it? This from the daughter whose college education I'd paid for, whose wedding had cost me more than my first car, whose down payment I'd helped with when she and Michael bought their modest 3-bedroom ranch. Apparently, Sarah had never bothered to think about where all that money had come from, or what I might have left over after a lifetime of building and selling homes. 35 years of running a successful business tends to add up, I said mildly. Plus, your mother and I were never the types to spend money on fancy vacations or expensive toys. We invested wisely. This is insane, Dad. You can't just buy a mansion because you're angry about our suggestion. This is exactly the kind of impulsive behavior that made us worry about you living alone. Impulsive behavior. I'd spent 2 weeks researching the purchase, had the house inspected by 3 different contractors, and had my financial advisor review the investment potential. But because it wasn't what Sarah wanted me to do, it was impulsive. I'm not angry, sweetheart. I'm just living my life the way I choose to live it, in my own home with my dignity intact. Your dignity? What's that supposed to mean? I walked back to the lounge chair and sat down, getting comfortable. This conversation was going to take a while. It means I'm not interested in being warehoused in someone's basement like an old piece of furniture that's too valuable to throw away but too inconvenient to keep in the main house. That's not what we were suggesting, and you know it. We were trying to take care of you. By hiding me in a basement, by making me a dependent instead of a patriarch, by treating me like I'm already dead instead of just getting older. Sarah's voice rose with frustration. You're being ridiculous. We offered you a place in our home with people who love you, and instead you go out and buy some ridiculous mansion you don't need just to prove a point. Maybe I'm proving a point, I admitted. Maybe the point is that I'm not ready to be managed like an invalid. Maybe the point is that I've earned the right to make my own choices, even if those choices seem extravagant to other people. Dad, this is just not practical. A house that big, the maintenance costs, the property taxes, the utilities, you'll bankrupt yourself trying to keep up with it. I laughed, actually laughed out loud. Sarah, I built houses for 35 years. I know exactly what it costs to maintain a property. I also know what it costs to heat, cool, and secure a home. I didn't make this purchase on a whim. But why? Why would you need 6 bedrooms? You're one person. That was the question I'd been waiting for. The reason behind the madness, the method to what she saw as impulsive behavior. Because, I said, settling deeper into the lounge chair, I have plans. The next morning, I woke up in a bedroom larger than some people's apartments. Sunlight streamed through windows that faced east toward the city, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Then I remembered, and I smiled. I'd slept better than I had in months. Maybe it was the expensive mattress, or maybe it was the satisfaction of knowing I'd taken control of my own life in a way that no one saw coming. I made coffee in a kitchen that looked like something from a cooking show, then took it out to the pool area to watch the sunrise. The landscapers had already been here. The grass was perfectly manicured, the flower beds weeded, the pool cleaned and ready for swimming. At 8 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Henderson, this is Amanda from Hillcrest Properties. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I have some rather unusual news. I set down my coffee cup. What kind of news? Oh, well, it seems your purchase has created quite a stir in the neighborhood. I've had 3 calls this morning from potential sellers who want to list their properties, and 2 from buyers who want to know if you might be interested in selling. Selling? I just moved in yesterday. I know, but the speed of your purchase and the fact that you paid cash has people talking. There's speculation that you might be flipping the property or that you're representing some kind of investment group. I thought about this for a moment. What did you tell them? I told them that my client's plans were confidential, but that if they had serious inquiries, I'd be happy to pass them along. Amanda, let me ask you something. What do you know about the rental market in Hillcrest? There was a pause. Rental market? Mr. Henderson, most people who can afford to live in Hillcrest prefer to own their homes. But theoretically, if someone wanted to rent a mansion like mine, what would that cost? Well, I'd have to do some research, but I'd estimate somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 per month, depending on the amenities and the length of the lease. $8,000 to $12,000 per month. I did some quick math in my head. Even at the low end, that would more than cover the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs, with plenty left over. Amanda, I may have another job for you soon, but for now, I'm quite happy being a homeowner. After I hung up, I walked through the house again, seeing it with new eyes. 6 bedrooms, each one larger than the basement apartment Sarah had offered me. A formal dining room perfect for hosting dinner parties. A library where I could read in peace. Guest quarters that were nicer than most people's master suites. I thought about Margaret, about how she'd always wanted to entertain more, but had been limited by our modest home. She'd have loved this place, would have filled it with laughter and music and the kind of dinner parties that people talked about for years afterward. But Margaret was gone, and I was here alone in a mansion that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. That's when the real plan started forming in my mind. The plan that would justify every penny I'd spent and every choice I'd made. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Tom Bradley had been my foreman for 15 years before retiring to take care of his wife during her battle with cancer. She'd passed away last year, and from what I'd heard, Tom was struggling with loneliness and financial pressures. Henderson Construction, this is Tom. Tom, it's Henry Henderson. How are you holding up? Henry, good to hear from you. I'm doing okay, I guess. Keeping busy with small jobs, trying to make ends meet. You know how it is. I did know how it was. Tom was probably living on Social Security and whatever small jobs he could pick up in a house that held too many memories and not enough income. Tom, I have a proposition for you. How would you feel about a change of scenery? Change of scenery? What kind of change are you talking about? I walked back into the house, phone pressed to my ear, imagining Tom's weathered face trying to process what I was about to offer him. Well, I just bought a place that's got more room than one old man knows what to do with. 6 bedrooms, beautiful grounds, pool that needs someone to actually use it. I was thinking maybe you'd like to come stay for a while. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up on me. Henry, are you offering me charity? Because you know I've never been the type to take handouts. Tom, in 15 years of working together, have I ever offered you charity? No, sir, you haven't. Then why would I start now? I'm talking about a mutually beneficial arrangement. This place needs someone who understands quality construction to keep an eye on things, someone who knows the difference between regular maintenance and someone trying to take advantage of an old homeowner. I could hear Tom breathing on the other end, considering. What exactly are you proposing? Move into one of the guest bedrooms. Help me figure out this place. In exchange, no rent, no utilities, and I'll pay you a consulting fee for property management. Think of it as semi-retirement with benefits. Henry, what kind of place are we talking about here? I looked around the marble foyer, up at the crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Tom's truck. The kind of place where the property taxes are more than most people's annual salary. The kind of place that comes with a 3-car garage and grounds that require professional landscaping. Another long pause. You bought a mansion, didn't you? I bought a statement, Tom. The mansion just happened to come with it. Tom's laugh was rough around the edges, like sandpaper on oak. Henry Henderson, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? Something that's going to be a lot more interesting with a friend around to share it. What do you say? I say you've lost your mind, but count me in. When do you want me there? How about this weekend? I'll send you the address, but fair warning, your GPS might think you made a wrong turn. After I hung up with Tom, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Anticipation. The house already felt less empty knowing someone else would be sharing it soon. But Tom was just the beginning. I had 5 more bedrooms and a plan that was getting clearer by the hour. I called Janet Morrison next. She'd worked as my office manager for 12 years before her husband's medical bills forced her into early retirement. Last I'd heard, she was working part-time at a grocery store to make ends meet, living in a cramped apartment since she'd had to sell the house. Henderson Construction, how may I help you? I blinked, confused. Janet? I thought you retired. Henry? Oh my goodness, I did retire. But Tom asked me to answer his phone while he's out on a job. Old habits, you know? Actually, that's perfect. I was calling to talk to both of you. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? Lunch? Henry, I'm working at Kroger until 3, and then I have to pick up extra shifts at the diner. I can't really afford to take time off for social visits. The exhaustion in her voice made my chest tighten. Janet Morrison was 68 years old and working 2 jobs to survive. This woman who'd organized my entire business life for over a decade, who'd never missed a day of work, who'd remembered every client's birthday and every employee's anniversary. Janet, what if I told you the lunch was actually a job interview? A job interview? Henry, you sold the company. What kind of job could you possibly have? The kind that comes with full benefits, flexible hours, and accommodations that would make your current landlord weep with envy. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining my situation to Janet, watching through my windows as the automatic sprinkler system watered gardens I'd never have to maintain myself. "So let me understand this," Janet said slowly. "You bought a mansion because your daughter wanted you to live in her basement?" "That's the simplified version, yes. And now you want Tom and me to come live there with you? I want you to help me turn this place into something Margaret would have been proud of. I want Tom to make sure nobody takes advantage of the old man with more house than sense. And I want both of you to stop working yourselves to death just to pay rent on places that don't deserve you." Janet was quiet for so long I thought she might have fainted. "Henry, this is crazy. People our age don't just move in together like college roommates. People our age don't usually have 6-bedroom mansions sitting empty either. But here we are." What would people say? They'd say we're smarter than they gave us credit for. "Janet, what's the worst that could happen? You hate it and move back to your apartment? At least you'd have a few months without worrying about grocery money." "The absolute worst that could happen is that I get used to living like royalty and then have to go back to reality." "Then we better make sure that doesn't happen." The next morning, I drove to my old neighborhood to pick up a few things I'd forgotten. As I pulled into my former driveway, Mrs. Henderson from next door came rushing over. "Henry, I heard you moved. I've been meaning to call, but I wasn't sure if it was true." Mrs. Henderson was 83 years old and had been our neighbor for 20 years. Since Margaret died, she'd made a point of checking on me regularly, bringing over casseroles and keeping me informed of neighborhood gossip. "It's true, Dorothy. Found a new place that better suits my current needs." "Oh, that's wonderful. I was worried you might have gone into one of those senior communities. Is it nearby? I hope we can still visit." I thought about Dorothy Henderson, alone in her house since her husband died 5 years ago, living on a pension that barely covered her medications, let alone home maintenance or social activities. "Actually, Dorothy, it's in Hillcrest. Big place with plenty of room for visitors. In fact, I was wondering if you might be interested in something more than just visiting." Her eyes lit up with curiosity. "What kind of something?" Well, the place has a beautiful guest suite, and I'm finding that living alone in a house that size is rather impractical. I was thinking maybe you'd consider a change of scenery yourself." Dorothy's mouth fell open. "Henry Henderson, are you asking me to move in with you?" "I'm asking if you'd like to be part of something different, something that might be more interesting than living alone and more dignified than being warehoused in some institutional setting." "But what would people think? An unmarried man and woman living together at our age." I laughed, actually laughed out loud. "Dorothy, you're 83 and I'm 72. I think we're a bit past worrying about scandal. Besides, Tom Bradley and Janet Morrison are coming too. It's going to be more like a boarding house than a love nest." Dorothy giggled like a schoolgirl. "A mansion boarding house? Something like that. What do you say?" "I say Margaret Henderson would have loved this idea. She always said you had a flair for the dramatic when you finally decided to make a move." "Is that a yes?" "Henry, I've been eating the same frozen dinner for 3 months because I can't afford variety. I've been watching the same 5 channels because cable is too expensive. I've been going to bed at 8 o'clock because there's nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. Yes, it's a yes." By the end of the week, I had 4 confirmed housemates and a plan that was starting to feel less like revenge and more like revolution. Tom arrived on Saturday morning in a pickup truck loaded with tools and the kind of practical wisdom that only comes from 40 years of honest work. Janet came Sunday afternoon with 2 suitcases and a skeptical expression that melted the moment she saw the guest suite I'd prepared for her. Dorothy moved in Tuesday, bringing her late husband's recliner and enough enthusiasm to power the entire mansion. The last bedroom I saved for Marcus Webb, my former accountant who'd been forced into retirement when his firm downsized. Marcus was a widower like me, living on Social Security in a studio apartment, spending his days doing tax returns for $10 each, just to have something to occupy his mind. "Henry, this is the most irresponsible financial decision I've ever seen you make," Marcus said when I called to explain the situation. "And I've been managing your money for 20 years. Marcus, when have any of my irresponsible decisions actually lost money?" "Well, never. But that doesn't mean this won't be the first time. Think of it as diversifying my investment portfolio into happiness futures." "That's not a real financial instrument, Henry." "It is now. Are you in or are you out?" Marcus moved in the following weekend, bringing his computer and a determination to turn my financial lunacy into something resembling a sound business plan. Within 2 weeks, the mansion had transformed from an empty statement into something else entirely. Tom had identified 3 maintenance issues that needed attention and had already gotten quotes from reliable contractors. Janet had organized a household management system that would have impressed a military quartermaster. Dorothy had started planning dinner parties and had somehow convinced the local garden club to hold their next meeting in our formal living room. Marcus had created a detailed budget projection that showed exactly how our shared living arrangement was not only sustainable, but actually profitable for everyone involved. And me, I was having the time of my life. The morning Sarah finally came to see what her stubborn father had done, I was sitting by the pool reading the newspaper, while Dorothy practiced piano in the music room, and Tom supervised the installation of a new water heater. The doorbell rang, and through the intercom system, I heard Janet's voice. "Mr. Henderson, your daughter's here to see you." I looked up from my paper, noting the formal tone Janet used when she disapproved of someone. Janet had met Sarah exactly twice in 12 years, but apparently that had been enough to form an opinion. "Send her out to the pool area, please." 5 minutes later, Sarah appeared at the French doors leading from the house to the patio, her face a mixture of disbelief and barely controlled fury. She wore her best lawyer suit, the one she used when she wanted to intimidate people, but it looked out of place against the backdrop of casual luxury that had become my new normal. "Dad, we need to talk." I folded my newspaper and set it aside, gesturing to one of the lounge chairs. "Of course, sweetheart. Have a seat. Can I get you something to drink? Dorothy made fresh lemonade this morning." "Dorothy? Who is Dorothy?" "One of my housemates. Lovely woman. Great piano player. You'll like her." Sarah remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides. "Housemates? Dad, what exactly is going on here?" I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. Through the windows, I could see Tom explaining something to a contractor, his hands moving as he described whatever needed fixing. Janet walked past carrying what looked like fabric samples, probably working on her latest project to properly furnish this place. The sound of Dorothy's piano drifted across the patio, something classical that made the whole scene feel like a movie. "What's going on here," I said slowly, "is that I've discovered something interesting about retirement." "Which is what?" "That it doesn't have to mean waiting around to die." Sarah's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that reminded me of the roses Margaret used to grow, the ones that bloomed brightest right before they fell apart. "This is absolutely ridiculous, Dad. You're living like some kind of eccentric millionaire with a bunch of strangers. And for what? To prove a point?" I stood up slowly, my joints protesting just enough to remind me that I was, in fact, 72 years old. But I felt younger than I had in years. "Sarah, let me introduce you to my friends." Before she could object, I was walking toward the house, leaving her no choice but to follow. We found Tom in the kitchen, explaining to Marcus why the original contractor had installed the wrong gauge wire for the pool lighting. Tom, Marcus, I'd like you to meet my daughter Sarah. Sarah, this is Tom Bradley, my former foreman and current property manager, and Marcus Webb, my accountant and financial advisor." Tom wiped his hands on a rag and extended one to Sarah with the kind of genuine smile that had made him popular with clients for 30 years. "Pleasure to meet you, Sarah. Your father talks about you all the time." Marcus stood from where he'd been reviewing electrical diagrams, adjusting his glasses with the precise movement of someone who'd spent decades dealing with numbers that had to add up perfectly. "Sarah, your father has created something quite remarkable here. From a financial standpoint, it's actually brilliant." Sarah shook their hands with the mechanical politeness of someone who'd been raised properly but was too angry to mean it. "Gentlemen, I appreciate what you're doing for my father, but I'm concerned this arrangement might be taking advantage of his generosity." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tom's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. Marcus removed his glasses and cleaned them with deliberate slowness. "Ma'am," Tom said with the careful politeness of a man who'd dealt with difficult clients before, "your father offered us a business arrangement. We're paying our way through services rendered, and frankly, we're getting the better end of the deal." "A business arrangement?" Sarah's lawyer instincts kicked in, her voice sharpening. "What kind of business arrangement?" Marcus stepped forward, and I recognized the expression he wore when he was about to deliver bad news to someone who thought they knew better than he did. Your father has created a cooperative living situation that reduces individual expenses while maximizing shared resources. Tom handles property management and maintenance, saving your father approximately $3,000 monthly in contractor fees. Janet manages household operations, eliminating the need for housekeeping and personal assistant services. Dorothy provides companionship and social coordination, which has measurable health benefits for seniors. I handle financial planning and tax preparation for the household. And what does my father get out of this arrangement? A life worth living, I said quietly. Instead of sitting alone in a house that felt more like a mausoleum every day, watching television and waiting for doctor appointments. Sarah turned to face me fully, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable in her expression, something that looked like the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was scared. Dad, this isn't normal. People our age don't just move strangers into their homes. People our age don't usually buy mansions either, but here we are. Janet appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying an armload of fresh flowers from the garden. She took in the scene with the quick assessment of someone who'd managed difficult situations for decades. Mr. Henderson, would you and your guest like some coffee? I was just about to start a fresh pot. Sarah's head snapped toward Janet with the kind of attention she usually reserved for hostile witnesses. And you must be the housekeeper. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the pool filter cycling in the distance. Janet set down her flowers with the careful precision of someone who was choosing her words very carefully. I'm Janet Morrison, household manager and former office manager for Henderson Construction. I've known your father for 12 years, and I've never been anyone's housekeeper. I apologize, Sarah said, but her tone suggested she wasn't apologizing for the assumption, just for saying it out loud. This is all very confusing. Dad never mentioned he was planning something like this. Your father doesn't need to clear his living arrangements with anyone, Dorothy's voice carried from the doorway, where she'd appeared like a silver-haired guardian angel. At our age, we've earned the right to make our own choices. Sarah looked around the kitchen at 4 faces that ranged from politely neutral to openly protective. For the first time since she'd arrived, I saw her realize that this wasn't a temporary arrangement or an old man's whim. This was a chosen family, and she was the outsider. Could I speak with my father privately, please? The others began to disperse with the kind of coordinated efficiency that comes from people who've learned to live together harmoniously. Tom returned to his electrical diagrams, Marcus gathered his financial reports, Janet busied herself arranging flowers, and Dorothy headed back toward the piano. But I could feel them listening, ready to step in if needed. Sarah and I walked back out to the pool area, where the afternoon sun was turning the water into liquid gold. She sat down in the chair she'd refused earlier, suddenly looking older than her 43 years. Dad, I need you to help me understand what's really going on here. I settled back into my own chair, watching a cardinal land on the edge of the pool for a drink. What's going on is that I remembered something I'd forgotten. Which is what? That just because you get older doesn't mean you have to get smaller. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her lawyer's mind probably working through implications and angles. This house must have cost a fortune. It cost exactly what it was worth to me. Which was what? Dad, I'm worried you've made a decision that's going to bankrupt you just to prove a point about the basement apartment. I turned to look at her, really look at her, trying to see past the anger and frustration to the daughter I'd raised. Sarah, do you know what your mother and I were worth when she died? I assumed you were comfortable. The business did well, and you always lived modestly. We were worth $2.3 million. Sarah's mouth fell open. $2.3 million? Dad, you never said anything about having that kind of money. Because it wasn't money we spent on ourselves. It was money we saved for emergencies, for security, for the possibility that one of us might need long-term care. It was money we planned to leave to you and your children. Plan to leave, past tense? I stood up and walked to the edge of the pool, dipping my fingers into the warm water. Sarah, when you suggested I move into your basement, when you made it clear that my independence was less important than your peace of mind, you made a choice about what kind of relationship we were going to have. Dad, I was trying to take care of you. No, you were trying to manage me. There's a difference. The sound of Dorothy's piano drifted across the water, something cheerful and complex that spoke of years of practice and genuine love for music. Through the kitchen windows, I could see Janet arranging her flowers in a crystal vase that probably cost more than she used to make in a week. "These people," Sarah said, gesturing toward the house, "they're using you." "Yes, they are. They're using my resources to live better than they could alone, and I'm using their company to live better than I could alone. It's called mutual benefit." "But what happens when the money runs out?" I laughed, actually laughed at the question. "Sarah, at current spending levels, including property taxes, utilities, maintenance, food, and household expenses for 5 people, this arrangement costs me less than what I was spending living alone in my old house. That's impossible." Marcus ran the numbers, shared expenses, bulk purchasing, eliminated service costs because we handle things ourselves. Tom hasn't let me hire a contractor for anything he can fix himself. Janet has turned household management into an art form that would make Martha Stewart weep with envy. Dorothy organized a garden club meeting here last week that resulted in enough donated plants to landscape the entire backyard. Sarah shook her head like she was trying to clear water from her ears. "But this house, the purchase price alone, will be recouped in 5 years through appreciation alone, according to Marcus's projections. Hillcrest property values have increased an average of 8% annually for the past decade. And if I ever decide to sell, there's apparently a waiting list of people who want to buy in this neighborhood." "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've had help thinking of everything. That's the point, Sarah. I don't have to figure out everything alone anymore." She was quiet for several minutes, watching the cardinal that had been joined by his mate at the pool's edge. "Dad, what you're doing here, it's not normal. Normal is what got me sitting alone in a house that felt more like a tomb every day, waiting for my daughter to decide I was too much trouble to live independently." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I turned to face her, feeling 40 years of accumulated frustration rising in my chest. "Sarah, I spent 35 years building a business that employed dozens of people and created homes for hundreds of families. I paid for your college education, your wedding, helped with your down payment when you bought your first house. I've been a loving father, a faithful husband, and a productive member of society for 7 decades. And your solution when I reached an age you considered problematic was to stick me in your basement like an elderly relative you're ashamed to acknowledge but too guilty to ignore completely." The words hung between us like a challenge. Sarah's face went through several emotions before settling on something that might have been understanding. "I never thought of it that way." "I know you didn't. That's the problem." Tom appeared at the French doors, his expression apologetic. "Henry, sorry to interrupt, but the electrician has a question about the pool lighting. Wants to know if you want the timer system upgraded while he's here." "What do you think, Tom?" "I think if we're going to do it, now's the time. Save on labor costs down the road." "Then let's do it right." Tom nodded and disappeared back into the house. Sarah watched this exchange with the kind of attention she usually reserved for cross-examining witnesses. "He calls you Henry." "That's my name." "But he works for you." "He works with me. There's a difference." Sarah stood up and walked to the pool's edge, staring down at her reflection in the water. "Dad, I came here today to talk you out of this, to convince you that you were making a mistake, and that you should come live with us properly, not in the basement, in Michael's office upstairs. And now? Now I'm wondering if maybe I'm the one who made the mistake." I joined her at the pool's edge, both of us looking down at our reflections wavering in the chlorinated water. "Sarah, I don't want you to think I'm doing this to hurt you. Aren't you? I'm doing this because I realize that I have maybe 10 or 15 good years left, and I don't want to spend them being managed like an invalid or hidden away like an embarrassment. But this arrangement, it can't last forever. What happens when someone gets sick? When someone dies? When people start having problems living together? The same thing that happens in any family. We figure it out as we go." "But these people aren't your family." I looked back at the house, where Janet was now teaching Marcus how to arrange flowers while Dorothy played piano, and Tom explained electrical theory to anyone who would listen. "Blood doesn't make family, Sarah. Choice does. Commitment does. Showing up for each other does." "Are you saying I didn't show up for you?" "I'm saying you showed up with conditions. You showed up with solutions that worked better for you than they did for me. You showed up wanting to manage my decline instead of supporting my life." Sarah was crying now, not the angry tears of frustration, but the quiet tears of someone who'd realized they'd been wrong about something important. Dad, I was scared. After Mom died, watching you alone in that house, I was terrified that something would happen to you and I wouldn't be there. I was terrified that you'd fall or have a heart attack or just fade away without anyone noticing. And your solution was to make sure I faded away somewhere you could keep an eye on me. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself from the possibility of losing me in a way you couldn't control. We stood there in the afternoon sun, father and daughter, looking at our reflections and trying to figure out how we'd gotten so far apart. So what happens now? Sarah asked finally. Now you decide what kind of relationship you want with the man I've become, instead of trying to turn me back into the man I used to be. And if I can't accept this? If I think you've lost your mind and you're being taken advantage of by people who see you as a meal ticket? Then you'll miss out on knowing the happiest I've been since your mother died. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you really think Mom would have approved of this? I thought about Margaret, about her fierce independence and her equally fierce loyalty to family, about the way she'd defended our choices against anyone who questioned them, and the way she'd never let anyone else define what our life should look like. Your mother would have bought a bigger house. Despite everything, Sarah laughed. A real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. She would have, wouldn't she? She would have bought a bigger house, hired a chef, and turned it into a bed and breakfast just to make sure everyone knew she was running the show. And she would have made it work somehow. She would have made it fabulous. We were both smiling now, remembering the woman who'd been the center of our family for so many years. Dad, I owe you an apology. You owe me a conversation, a real one, where you listen to what I'm saying instead of planning what you're going to say next. I can do that. And I owe you an explanation about why I didn't tell you about the money, about the house, about any of this. I'd like that explanation. But first, I want you to meet my friends properly, not as people who might be taking advantage of me, but as people who've chosen to share their lives with me. Sarah nodded, straightening her shoulders in the way she did when she was preparing to do something difficult. Okay, but Dad? Yes? Next time you decide to buy a mansion, maybe give me a heads up. For my blood pressure, if nothing else. I'll take it under consideration. As we walked back toward the house, I could hear the sounds of my chosen family going about their daily lives. Tom's voice explaining something technical to Marcus, Janet humming while she worked in the kitchen, Dorothy's piano providing a soundtrack to it all. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was walking toward something instead of away from something. And for the first time since this whole mess started, Sarah was walking beside me instead of trying to push me in a direction I didn't want to go. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as we entered the house, illuminating dust motes that danced like possibilities in the air. There was still a lot to figure out, still conversations to have and relationships to rebuild. But for now, it was enough that we were both willing to try.